Yeah, you can check online.
Are we ready to go, Shaw?
Over to you, Roger.
Oh, okay. I was waiting for some magic to happen. I want you to picture the scene as we kick off this morning's session. It's a balmy summer afternoon in a quiet suburb of Durban. The power's out because Block 14A has just slipped into the second hour of load shedding, and a young boy is playing cricket in his backyard. And the lad announces to his mother, who was affectionately watching from the window, "I am the greatest batter in all of cricket." It's the last over of the World Cup final. 3 balls remaining. South Africa need 4 runs to win. The crowd is hushed. He threw the ball into the air, takes an almighty swing with his bat, and he misses. Still 2 more to go, but I won't need the second one because I'm the greatest batter in all of cricket. He tosses the ball into the air again, takes another almighty swing, and the ball lands softly at his feet. Not a problem for the greatest batter in all of cricket, just getting my iron. Once again, he throws the ball into the air. And once again, he takes a massive swing. This time, he swings so hard, he spins around on his heels and falls onto the grass. The ball landing nearby untouched. The boy gets up, dusts off his pants and cries out, "The game is over. South Africa lose the World Cup." His mother calls out from the window, "But hey, aren't you upset that you didn't get a hit? After all, you're the greatest batter in all of cricket." The boy turns to her and smiles and says, "No way, Mom. I've just discovered I'm the greatest bowler in all of cricket." When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of perspective. And perspective is not just powerful, it can be damn near magical. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the session today. Today's topic is a little different. It's not something that ordinarily appears on training programs, but I think it's an incredibly underrated topic, and all too often, it's a forgotten skill. I was a science teacher for 20 years, and during that time, I developed a passion for getting people to think differently about the world and about their place in it. And trust me, I could talk for hours on this topic. And luckily, I have hours this morning, so strap in. Ludwig Wittgenstein, the well-known philosopher. You all heard of him? Everybody? Okay, I'll start again. The rather unknown philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, was pondering a problem while walking down the hallways at work. And he was thinking about, why did people believe for so long that the sun revolved around the earth? Now, there's a big spoiler alert here. It doesn't. But while pondering this question, he bumps into a colleague of his, and he poses the question to him. Why was it obvious for so long for people to believe that the sun went around the earth? And his friend thinks about this for a moment and says, well, Ludwig, it's because it just looks as if the sun goes around the earth. And this is the picture we have. When we stand in the morning and look at the sunrise, we see the sun come up and go over the top of us and around the back and set in the west. And Ludwig thought about this, and he responded, well, what would it look like if it had looked as if the earth were rotating? Think about that for a moment. And the answer is obvious. It would look exactly the same. You see, when we're able to take a step back and look at things from a different perspective, we can get a whole different picture of how the world works. And if teaching science for 20 years taught me anything, it is that we are probably wrong. And I was recently wrong about Formula One. I think about all those wasted years that I spent believing that it was boring. I mean, it's just cars driving around a track. slightly faster than a blue light brigade. But it's so much more than that. And surprisingly, far less dangerous. You see, a couple of years ago, my daughter prompted me to start watching a few races. It was the season that Max Verstappen won his first world title. And at the time, I reluctantly agreed for the sake of a little father-daughter bonding time. And the thing is, race after race, I started thinking a little more deeply about the sport. And I started to learn that it was jammed full of competing tactics, statistics, backstory, exotic locations, intrigue, comedy, excitement, and Martin Brundle's grid walk, a highlight of unexpected delights before every race. Now we each have our favorite teams and drivers. For me, there is only one, Fernando Alonso. We have our own opinions, and I start to look forward to every race. It turns out I actually love Formula One, and I know quite a bit about it. Some of my opinions, I think, are even valid. The great physicist Richard Feynman once said, nearly everything is interesting if you go into it deeply enough. And the point is, taking the time to think more deeply about simple things makes all the difference. And it is the starting point that unleashes the power of perspective. Many of you know the Eurostar. You may have ridden the Eurostar. It is a shining light in Britain's, I would say, otherwise creaking transport network at the moment. This incredible high-speed rail service connects the United Kingdom with France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. It was built way back in 1994. And in 2007, they spent £6 million to reduce the travel time between Paris and London by about 20 minutes. £6 million for 20 minutes. Now, for approximately 0.01% of this money, you could have put Wi-Fi on the trains, which wouldn't have reduced the duration of the journey, but it would have improved its enjoyment, and it would have made it far more useful. They do, by the way, have Wi-Fi on the trains now, but the journey is far too short to be of any use. You see, for maybe 10% of the money, you could have paid all the world's top supermodels to walk up and down the train, handing out free Dom Perignon to all the passengers. You'd still have about £5 million in change, and people would ask for the trains to be slowed down. Our ability to put things in perspective has some big payoffs. You see, you begin to realize that there is more than one way to view a problem, which means there is probably more than one solution. Complex problems can often become clear, and what you think are simple solutions could reveal a complexity that you hadn't thought of. And I think perhaps the biggest payoff is that developing your perspective brings with it an understanding of people that probably wasn't there before. You see, I think early in the morning, it's always a good idea to kick off with a game. How about a little quiz? Are you ready for this? We're going to do a quiz this morning, and it's a multiple choice, so no big challenges. There are no prizes for winning the race, and there are right and wrong answers, but we will not mock you and chastise you if you get it wrong, like back when you were in school. So be honest about your answers, and it's a topic that you know really well. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly. Let's go for it. All right. Oh, you're good. Can you see that? The quiz is called The State of the World. All right, it's the world we live in. I'm going to ask you 6 questions, multiple choice, A, B, or C, about the state of the world. I want you to look at each question and don't give me the answer. Just write the answer down. If you've got a pen and paper, jot it down, or just hold that answer in your head. And then we'll come back and we'll have a look at how we did. Are we ready to go? State of the World quiz. Let's do it. Question number 1 looks like this. I want to know what percentage of people in the world today are literate, i.e., they can read and write. All right. And we're looking at people who are of reading and writing age. So let's call it from the age of 12 upwards. If we look at the world today, what percentage of people in the world today can read and write? A, 45%, B, 65%, or C, 90%? Pick your answer, jot it down, and let's go on to question number 2. I want to know, in the last 30 years, so going back to the mid-90s, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has A, almost doubled, B, remained the same, or C, more than halved. So over the last 30 years, the proportion of the world's population that lives in extreme poverty, has it doubled since then? Has it remained about the same since then? Or has it more than halved since then? Jot down your answer, A, B, or C, and we move on to question 3. Looking at the last century, so going back to the 1920s, I want to know, how did the deaths per year from natural disasters change? So comparing it to 100 years ago, the number of people who die from natural disasters, now that is floods, earthquakes, wildfires, volcanoes, has it more than doubled? Has it remained about the same, or has it decreased to less than half? A, B, or C? The number of deaths from natural disasters over the last 100 years. Our next question. I want to know, of all the plastic produced in the world, what percentage of plastic waste ends up in the world's oceans? What percentage of the plastic waste ends up in our world's oceans? Is it less than 6, around 36%, or is it more than 66%? Answer A, B, or C? All good? Bang, next question. We bring the questions home now to our country. And if we compare with the year 2000, so 23 years ago, how has the murder rate in South Africa changed? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Or has it remained about the same? So comparing today with the year 2000, how has the murder rate in South Africa changed? Increased, decreased, or remained about the same? A, B, or C? Cool. Next question. Looking at the South African population aged 13 and above, what percentage of our population has a Facebook account? What percentage of South Africa's population aged 13 or more have a Facebook account? A, B, or C? A is 30%, B is 60%, C is 85%. All good. All right. Do you all have your answers locked in? All good. I can't see you, so I'll assume that's a goodie. All right. Let's go. So, looking at the percentage of people in the world today that are literate, how many of you said 45%? How many of you said 65%? And how many of you said 90%? All right. I see Vimbai there says 65%. All right. The percentage of the world's population today that is literate is 90%. Right now, 90% of the world's population are literate, can read and write. Interestingly, if we think about this statistic, and obviously there are levels of literacy, but we are living in a time where within the next 10 years, there will not be people on earth who cannot read and write. We're going to change the very meaning of the term illiterate, because people who can't read and write won't exist anymore. If we look at the next question, in the last 30 years, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty, who said doubled? Who said remained about the same? And who got the correct answer? It has more than halved. The number of people living in extreme poverty today has more than halved. Here's a graph. If we look at this graph distribution, if you had to go back to 1820, that's 200 years ago, 94% of the world's population lived in what we would measure as extreme poverty. So if you were born 200 years ago, you had almost 100% chance of being extremely poor. Simple as that. And then you can see from the 1990s, where it was about 45%, extreme poverty has decreased significantly. We are now sitting just below the 10% mark. Only 10% of the world's population live in extreme poverty. Now, I say only, we still have massive challenges on our hands as a species, because with 8 billion people on Earth, 10% is 800 million people. That's not an insignificant number. But the point is, it is at a level that is reaching zero. Our next question. How did the deaths per year from natural disasters change in the last century? Now, obviously, there's a lot more people that live on Earth today than 100 years ago. So we would expect a lot more are affected by natural disasters. Who said more than doubled? Who said remained the same? And then, of course, it's decreased to less than half. And you can see where the quiz is going. Less than half the number of people today die from natural disasters, despite the fact that the media bombard us every 5 minutes with the state of the world. Here's a graph from 2017 that shows us what you are likely to die from. And if you look at the bottom of that chart, natural disasters is the last. You are very unlikely in today's world to die from a natural disaster. We would think terrorism would rank high on the list. Terrorism is only second from the bottom. Cardiovascular diseases, cancers, respiratory diseases, dementia, all of those top the list. The things we are scared of are not the things that end up killing us. What percentage of all the plastic in the world ends up in the oceans? Who said less than 6%? Who said around 36%? Who said more than 66%? Vimbai's in the game at more than 66. And the answer is less than 6%. Less than 6% of all the plastic produced ends up in the oceans. And again, although the percentage is small, if we look at a graph, I mean, last year alone, we produced more than, reaching on 400 million tons of plastic. 6% of that is a significant amount of plastic. But the point is this: when we believe a problem is insurmountable, because the media lead us to believe that the amount of plastic that we pump into the oceans is heading to 60, 70, 80%, that begins to be a problem that we throw our hands up over. We can't fix 70%. It is too big. The challenge is insurmountable. But when we begin to understand the real picture, 6% is a problem we can tackle. It is something we can fix. Our next question. Compared with the year 2000, how has the murder rate in South Africa changed? Who said increased? Who said, Vimbai, you're in for increased? Who said decreased? And who said remained about the same? Well, the actual answer is the murder rate has decreased since the year 2000. Not only has it decreased, it has decreased by 25%. That is a massive change. Here's a graph that shows from 1995 all the way through until 2020. And you can see province by province, and overall in South Africa, how that murder rate has steadily decreased over the last number of years. And finally, what percentage of South Africa's population aged 13 and above have a Facebook account? Who said 30? Who said 60? Who said 85? Wimbai's in the game, 85. The actual answer is 30%. Only 1/3 of our population, aged 13 above, have a Facebook account. And so you can see, folks, that the way we see things is not always the way it is. And this is where the power of perspective starts to come in. Let me just end my screen share there for a second. Okay, we're all back. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to get out of where I am. There we go. So here's the point of that quiz. And all of you should have added up your score by now. And I would guarantee that all of you sitting out there, very few of you did any better than 33%. You probably got 1/3 of those answers correct. You see, things are not always what they are. They are what we think they are. And the interesting thing about this quiz is that it is actually done by a company called Gapminder. And they do it all over the world. They've got a whole series of like 50 questions or so that they ask about the world, about people's everyday experience. They ask students, they ask university professors, they ask people like you and I, and they ask politicians these questions. And time after time, no one scores better than chance guess, 33%. And from that, we can see there is a major problem we have in that, especially when it comes to our political leaders, because they are making decisions about the world and about our futures based on a perception of the world that is entirely incorrect. Because we are bombarded by messages and media, and we seldom take the time to think a little more deeply about the simple things. And our perceptions are leaky at best. And the way we see the world impacts how we behave and the decisions we take. If any of you have read the story To Kill a Mockingbird, you would remember that in the book, Atticus Finch says to his daughter, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. You see, until we see things from another person's perspective, we will never really understand why things happen the way they do. Sometimes things appear to be big, but in the big picture, it's actually something small. And on the contrary, sometimes things appear to be really small, but when you relate it to the big picture, it may cause a lot more harm than you think. So the question I want to pose is this: if perspective is so powerful, why do we so often fail to use it? If perspective is so powerful, why do we so often fail to use it? And I believe this is the problem. A few years ago, at a prominent hospital in South Africa, a woman wakes up, and she wakes up to the realization that the wrong side of her body is bandaged. You see, the wrong side of her body is bandaged because the surgeon felt that he was standing on the right side. We have a tendency as human beings to become trapped in our justification. We get stuck in the feeling of being right. And this has a lot to do with the feeling of being wrong. We all know that being wrong doesn't feel cool. It's uncomfortable. It can be humiliating. It can even be devastating. So we have this attachment to being right. It's very human, but it comes with a dark side. You see, our attachment to being right keeps us from learning. It holds us back in our relationships and our careers. And in its ugliest form, it actually causes us to marginalize others and even treat people badly. If we don't take a moment to consider that maybe we are wrong, it can lead us down a very destructive path. We often resist the urge to revise our own perceptions because we're wrongly convinced that we are right in what we believe. The truth is, our perceptions are more often than not incorrect because we give meaning according to our own personal belief systems. But by accepting that we might be wrong, this can be a revelation to us, because being wrong means you're learning something new. All you have to do is look at the quiz we've just done. So many of you sitting there this morning were deeply rooted in your answers. Many of you would have stood up and defended those answers based on the information and the perceptions that you held, where in reality, we're entirely wrong about the world we live in. And we are faced with it every day, and we still don't know the true picture. I want you to consider this riddle. Acting on an anonymous phone call, the police raid a house of a suspected murderer. Now, they don't know what he looks like. All they know is his name is John. They get to the house, they break through the front door, and they find a carpenter, a truck driver, a car mechanic, and a fireman all playing cards. Without even asking his name, the policeman immediately pounce on and arrest the fireman. But here's the thing. How do they know they've got their man? How do they know they've got their man? And most of us will struggle with this riddle. Why? Because it comes down to perspective. You see, how we see things around us depends on our own experiences, our schematic knowledge, our culture, our society, our background. The way we are brought up shapes our perspective on things, unless we work to change it. If we change our viewpoint and look at things in a different way, like Ludwig Wittgenstein did, the answer will pop up clearly in front of our faces. You see, the fireman John was the correct person because he was the only man in the house. The carpenter, the truck driver, I can't remember who the other one was, and the mechanic were all women. And they knew they were looking for a man. You see, all of us, when faced with that riddle, based on our upbringing and the societies we live in, will immediately view the mechanic, the truck driver, and the carpenter probably as men. And we fail to see the obvious answer. All human beings have their own realities. The way we view people, the way we view things or situations, tells us a lot about how we really are. We all make sense of the world in our own ways. And these perceptions are constantly instilled in our attitudes, our behaviors, and our words. However, by accepting different perspectives from others, we begin to improve our communication. Our empathy increases, and our relationships with other people and ourselves will begin to improve. We'll finally comprehend and accept that there is beauty in human uniqueness and there is strength in our diversity. I want you to ponder this. What if you were never wrong about anything? What if you were never wrong about anything? Well, for starters, you'd be my wife. Now, I don't mean that you became all-knowing of things. What I mean by this statement is, once you came to learn something, that was it. You never went back. Nothing could ever change your mind. Once you came to know something, that was the belief that you clung onto for the rest of your life. Now imagine how much BS you would believe. You see, spoiler alert here, but I used to believe in Father Christmas, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy. I believed in ghosts, UFOs, psychics, astrology. I believed in the Loch Ness Monster, vampires, and werewolves. The amount of woo that I believed was truly mind-boggling. And many of you sitting there have the same situation. Because here's the point. I grew up in a world that was a lot more primitive than today. I grew up in a world that was a simpler time. My friends call it the good old days. I tend to disagree strongly with the good old days statement. The only thing good was the music. Those were the good old days. The thing is, the world I grew up in was devoid of technology and access to information. AI in the 1970s and 80s was in science fiction movies. I, and many of you, were totally reliant on authority for our knowledge. If we needed to know something, we had to rely on our parents, our teachers, our lecturers. But here's the thing, we don't need authority for our knowledge anymore. We have access to more information on our cell phones than the President of the United States had 20 years ago. But to take advantage of this, we have to develop one critical thing. The astronomer Jill Tarter said that the story of humans is the story of ideas. It's ideas that shine light into dark corners. You see, most of the breakthroughs, the discoveries, the remarkable inventions, and the game-changing ideas throughout history have one single thing in common. They are the result of curiosity. And curiosity is a game changer in a rapidly changing world. You see, when we are curious about things, we begin rather to gain perspective. That impulse that we have to seek out new information and experiences and to explore novel possibilities, it turns out to be far more important than we previously thought. You see, cultivating curiosity at all levels helps us adapt to uncertain conditions. When we're curious, we think more deeply and we become more rational about decisions that we make. And we come up with innovative solutions. And this builds more trusting and more collaborative relationships. There is a strong argument to be made that curiosity is one of the most powerful tools that leaders can develop. When we are curious, we view difficult situations far more creatively. And we begin to develop a culture of transformation in our teams. The inspiration for the Polaroid camera was actually the result of a 3-year-old's question. You may remember the Polaroid camera, instant camera, click, and the photo comes out, you give it a shake, and you've got your picture. Now, the inventor was a man called Edwin Land. And he had recently taken a picture, and his daughter was impatient to see the photo that her father had just snapped. And he explained to her that the film still had to be processed and had to be developed, and then she could see the picture. And she wondered out loud. She said, "But Dad, why do we have to wait for the picture?" Why indeed? You see, what if, Edwin pondered, we did not have to wait for the picture? And the rest is history. If we are going to develop our curiosity, we must learn to ask why. We must learn to ask what if. Why are we leading this way? What if I did it this way? Why do we do things this way? What if we did it that way? And building this curiosity will begin to fuel experimentation, learning, and discovery. It builds within us an empathy that begins to shine a light on our purpose, and it steadily shifts our perspectives. And at this point, I want to pause for a moment and give you an opportunity to ask any questions you have on this idea of perspective. Are we all good? Are we all there? Awesome stuff. And that brings me to a critical topic. It's something that I've spoken about fairly regularly recently. It brings me to today and Generation Z, the modern generation, entitled, lazy, rude, spoiled. I mean, seriously, folks, what is it with today's youth? And you're all sitting there and you have your opinions about this modern generation. And I want to wrap up today talking about this idea of Generation Z in terms of the power of perspective. When I was teaching back in the early 90s, my students back then were not allowed to use calculators. You see, in my mind, the reason I gave was powerful. It was self-explanatory. Because you will not always have a calculator in your pocket. Remember that? And I was right. I was absolutely right. You see, today, you've got a clock, a camera, a video recorder, an editing suite, a calendar, a phone book. You've got global radio stations, movie theaters, song catalogs, maps of every place on earth, connectivity to anyone in every country, and instant access to information. Oh, and I have 5 different calculators, all in my pocket. You see, today's generation will never comprehend the alien world that I and many of you grew up in. Remember the anxiety of waiting for your school photo to arrive? I mean, that was the only time you saw a picture of you and your friends at school. Remember the tension of sitting on a Sunday, listening to the top 40, your fingers poised over the record and pause button of your cassette player, waiting to capture your song when it came on, hoping that the DJ didn't cut in the beginning and end of the song. I remember the excitement of renting a home movie, the sheet on the wall, because you missed it on circuit a year and a half ago. Or the frustration of going to the library and finding the one book you need to complete your research on the project you're doing, only to find someone's already taken it out. And thinking, to coin Alanis Morissette, isn't it ironic, don't you think? You see, here's the rub. Technology isn't just changing what we can do. It's changing how we expect to engage. Consider the 20th century. It was built from the top down. The 20th century was powered by big bureaucracies, great corporations. It was underpinned by the principles of profit, hierarchies, control, rigid planning, and privacy. Ordinary people, people like you and me, I mean, we had critical roles to play in this world, but they were small roles. You see, we were taught to say our prayers, do our drills, learn your times tables, sit for your class photo, stay in your lane, and serve your time. Serve your time. When we look at the youth of today, our Generation Z are on average more educated, better informed, and have access to more information than any previous generation in history. And the rise of technology is beginning to shift norms, beliefs, and opportunities. Young people today are pushing back. They are pushing back against our traditional norms of hierarchy, loyalty, and staying in your lane. And they are beginning to push back hard. And I would argue, rightly so. They are challenging the traditional systems that we are hanging on to so dearly. Systems that are so revered in our organizations and governments worldwide. The youth of today are demanding something different. You see, they want to move from profit, hierarchies, control, planning, and privacy to a world that is dominated by purpose, networks, empowering, experimentation, and transparency. Today's generation has a new expectation. They have an inalienable right to participate. Consider Ntombi. Now, Ntombi is a second-year student, and she's preparing for her place in the world right now. From her cell phone, she is already an investor and a funder. She's a creator, a critic, an artist. She's an activist and a marketer. She is currently collaborating in real time with a student in Canada. And Ntombi generates a post on Facebook or on Instagram. It is shared 500 times. And the feedback she gets, it's exciting, it's empowering, and most important of all, it's instant. Now, I want you to contrast Ntombi's experience with something that looks a bit more like reality in her world. Ntombi prepares to submit an assignment that she's worked on for 2 weeks to complete. She's poised over the keyboard and she's waiting nervously. Finally, she plucks up the courage and she clicks send. And nothing. You see, 3 weeks goes by and there's crickets. Ntombi doesn't get any OMG, that's amazing. She gets no hearts, no thumbs up. There's no hashtag must read. And her assignment is shared with no one. Now move on a few years as Ntombi prepares to take her place in the workplace, which is steeped in 20th century principles. Stay in your lane, serve your time. And then you and I are surprised when Ntombi is disengaged and disillusioned. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at begin to change. This generation is not worse than we were. We have forgotten how bad we were. This generation is not more entitled than we were or lazy. We have forgotten how lazy we were. Every generation thinks that their parents don't understand their world. I mean, I remember my dad telling me how lucky I was, privileged, spoiled, because you know what? I got to ride a bicycle to school in winter in shorts. You see, my dad wasn't so lucky. He had to walk to school barefoot across devil thorns in the snow. And his dad was also far less fortunate because he crawled through barbed wire, naked, across devil thorns to get to school. And so the story goes. Every generation thinks their parents do not understand their world. But the point is, this generation is different because this generation is actually correct. They are growing up in a radically different world from us, a world that, if we're honest, we don't understand. And sure, they have a lot to learn, as we did when we were young. But for us, there is an opportunity here. We have a generation that want more feedback and agency. And this is not something to be squandered. This is not something to label as entitled, lazy, spoilt, or rude. We have a generation that does not want to stay in their lane and serve their time. It's one of the reasons that we have a perspective out there that this generation is rude, because we are spending so much time trying to put them in a box, the box that we grew up in, instead of giving them the opportunity to share the ideas that they have. My daughter, my oldest daughter, graduated last year. She graduated cum laude with a BCom degree in marketing and communication. Now, I didn't have to tell you that she graduated cum laude. I do it because I can, because I have the platform. But the point is, she started a job 3 months ago, and she's working as a planner and a junior supply chain person. I don't know what her title is. A lot of the work she does is on Excel. And while she was working on a project the other day, she discovered a much simpler way to do something. So she called her manager over and said, look, I've discovered that if we do this, we can save ourselves a whole lot of time. And her manager turned to her and said, we do it that way. She said, yes, what? We do it that way. And that was it. Conversation closed. Stay in your lane and serve your time. You see, that manager's just taken a young person filled with energy, excitement, and the opportunity to make a difference, to feel that she belongs in that company, and it's been destroyed in 1 second. She will never offer an opinion or an idea again. It's done. She's not entitled. She's not opinionated. She wants to participate in the process. And in a world where progress is really grinding to a halt, climate change is wreaking havoc on our economies, our societies, our environments. Unemployment, inequality, racism, and corruption are rampant at the moment. And trust and democracy are crumbling. It is Ntombi's generation that are going to be the one we must rely on to save us. So before we jump onto our old school bandwagons and talk about how we were when we were young, let's change the way we think about dealing with this generation. I had a conversation with someone the other day. I was working at the East Coast Radio House and Garden Show over this last week, and I was speaking to one of the exhibitors, and she was talking about her kids. And she was saying, you know, kids today are so spoiled. And as much as I agree to a point to that statement, I have to make her pause and say, if kids are spoiled, who is spoiling them? Now, for those of you sitting out there, I want you to think about, do you have kids under the age of 25? And if you do, ask yourself these questions. Did your kids catch a train to school? Did they catch a bus to school? How many of your kids walk to school? How many of your kids have to go to the library to get a book out and sit there for 3 hours researching information? Well, none of them. My kids certainly didn't. And sure, we wouldn't let our kids walk to school today if we can avoid it, because the world is a scary place. But here's the thing. If our kids are spoiled, it's not their fault. It's ours. We can't create a monster and then complain about its behavior. We have to take responsibility for that. And we need to understand that the youth of today aren't any different than we were. They are just growing up in a world that is radically different from the one we grew up in. And bear in mind as well, how rapidly the world changes today. I mean, I think of the world in the 70s and the 80s, and even in the 90s. That world over those 30 years, it didn't change very much. My world in the 70s was much the same as my world in the 80s. The music got better. My world in the 80s was much the same as my world in the 90s. But you look at today's generation, from the day Generation Z were born in the year 2000, just in 10 years, how much the world changed. And for those next 10 years, how much their world changed. Look how much our world has changed in the last 5. There's an experiment that I think Daniel Pink refers to, where you put 2 dogs in a box, and the box has an electric floor. And every now and then, an electric shock is applied to the floor, and it gives the dogs a bit of a sting. Now, here's the difference. One of the dogs has a small button in its half of the box. And when it learns to nuzzle the button, the electric shock stops. The other dog doesn't have a button, but it's exposed to exactly the same level and duration of pain as the dog in the first box. So in other words, when the dog in the first box nuzzles the button, the electric shock stops for both dogs. But here's the difference. The first dog generally remains relatively content and calm in the situation. The second dog lapses into complete depression. The circumstances of our lives actually matter less to our happiness than the sense of control that we feel over our lives. That second dog, despite the fact that it's receiving the same amount and duration of pain, he feels that he has no control over his environment, and he lapses into depression. And our perspective is central to the control that we feel. All our old stories are crumbling, and new stories are incredibly slow to replace them. Understand that this generation, they don't feel in control of their lives. They don't feel that they have agency, and they don't feel that they are valued in their environments. There's a story of a teacher who gets hired in a disadvantaged neighborhood, and he realizes that the kids cannot read and write. They hate the textbooks that they have because the information in those textbooks have no relevance to their world. Nothing in those textbooks represents their lives. So he decides to take away all their textbooks, and he replaces it with, he gives them each a little cheap instant camera. And he says, I want you to go out into the world and take pictures of your lives. And they do this. And he teaches them how to print out these pictures of the shacks they live in, of the poverty they're exposed to on a daily basis. And he takes these pictures and he says to them, now, I want you to go home and I want you to write down these stories. I want you to write the stories of your lives. And they say to him, but we don't know how to write. And so they learn. You see, they learn because they want to write their own stories. They now see the relevance. This generation, Generation Z, has lost faith in the stories that we tell them, because the stories we tell them are a lie. They hold no relevance in their world. We need to replace these with new stories. We need to replace it with their stories. You see, there was a time, there was a world that we grew up in where if you served your time, if you went to school and you got a matric certificate, you could take that matric certificate and you could go to university. And at university, you could get a degree. And that degree would guarantee you a job. And if you worked hard in that job, you would be guaranteed to climb the ladder. And you would do this for 45 years. And then you would retire and you would get a gold watch and you would do the things you wanted to do when you were 20. You see, we tell this story to our kids, but the story's a lie. Because going to school and getting a matric certificate doesn't necessarily give you access to university. And if it does, and you get that degree, it doesn't guarantee you a job. And getting a job doesn't guarantee you a climb up the corporate ladder. This generation don't want to climb the corporate ladder. That story is broken. We tell them that if you embrace democracy and you vote, you can make a difference. And we live in a world where they don't see that happen. Our old stories are broken. And it's our fault, not Generation Z's fault. If we want to be part of driving positive change, we as individuals have to unlearn our outdated instincts. We have to change the way we think. We have to change the way we lead our organizations. And we have to give this generation an opportunity to participate, to make a difference. I want to talk very quickly about road rage. I suffer from intense road rage. Wow. But here's the thing. When I'm driving and someone cuts me off, I lose my mind. I swear, I gesticulate, I throw all sorts of signs at the person. It's carnage in my car. But here's an interesting point. When I'm in a supermarket doing shopping and I'm pushing my trolley around and someone cuts me off, my behavior is very different. I don't scream and shout and gesticulate. In fact, in most instances, I'm the one who's apologetic. Why is there this difference in behavior? And many of you sitting there may experience the same thing. And here's the point. When we're in our vehicle, we have the bravery of separation. It's a real thing. You see, in my car, I'm separated from that person who's cut me off. I can be brave. I can scream. I can shout. In the supermarket, I'm not like that. That person's right in front of me. I'm suddenly not as brave as I previously was. And this is the same effect that technology has on us. It's the danger of communicating electronically, email, WhatsApp, engaging in social media conversations. We're a lot braver when we are separated by technology than we are in a face-to-face situation. Remember, Generation Z has grown up in a world where they communicate online. Something they really struggle with is conversation. They struggle with difficult conversations. I complain about my younger daughter all the time. If I sit down with her to have a difficult conversation, she bursts into tears. Every single, stop it, let's talk, but she can't do it. And I criticize that behavior. Instead of taking a step back and saying, hang on a second, there is a reason for this behavior. If I change my perspective, I can see why she's like that. You see, the mistake I've made is instead of teaching her to have personal face-to-face conversations, I've allowed her to run free and communicate online. If we want to be part of driving positive change, folks, we need to unlearn our outdated instincts. We need to give this generation a chance, because when we do, they will surprise you with how hungry they are and what contribution they can make to our organizations. The power of perspective will be central to making the world a better place going forward, to ensuring that this new generation will turn into the leaders that can make an impact in the world. The reality is this: despite the arrogance of our perceived uniqueness, and we do as a species think that we are unique, we do think that we are superior to all other species. Here's the reality. We are literally apes in clothing. If we scaled the entire history of the universe down to a single 24-hour day. Now, I don't know if you know how long the universe has been around. Science actually has a pretty accurate answer to this. We know that the universe started 13.8 billion years ago. If we took all 13.8 billion years and we scaled it down to a single 24-hour day, when did modern humans in their current form arrive? Well, here's the thing. We arrived 4 seconds ago. So, if the universe has been around for 24 hours, our entire history, every person who's lived, every battle that has been fought, everyone you've ever loved, everyone who has ever been loved, has only lived in the last 4 seconds. Think about that for a moment. Every technological advancement, every change has happened in 4 seconds. We live in an increasingly complicated world. Sure, it's the most stimulating time in human history, but the pace of change and that barrage of conflicting information is overwhelming. As a species, we face a collapse in meaning. I mean, many of us are left thinking, what should we believe? What should we take seriously? What is the point of it all? Seriously, what is our purpose? And as the pace of change increases, the very meaning of being human is actually going to start to change. And we just want someone to make sense of it all. This modern generation are looking to us to give them a glimmer of hope. And I always say to them that the best I can offer you is this. We're all going to die. I know that sounds gloomy, but if we think about this from a different perspective, the fact that we're going to die, this makes us the lucky ones. Because most people are not going to die. Because most people are never going to be born in the first place. If we think about what are the chances of us being here, each of us, individuals, think about that journey that had to happen for you specifically to be sitting in that chair where you are sitting today. You see, for each one of us to be here, our parents had to meet. Not only did they have to meet, they had to meet at that very specific time. And they had to do that thing on that very specific day. Because if they had met and done that at any other time, you would not be sitting here. Someone else would. And the point is that for your parents to be here, their parents had to meet and do that thing at that specific time. And so if we trace our history all the way back to that Brontosaurus standing to the left of the palm tree 65 million years ago, the chances of us being here is ridiculously small. That makes us the lucky ones. And it is for that reason that we need to step outside of our assumptions. We need to learn to think bigger and wider than we've traditionally done. And I urge you to remember to focus on appreciating the fact that you get to play the incredible game of golf. Don't lose your shit over a few bad shots. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of perspective. And like I said, perspective isn't just powerful. It can be damn near magical. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I have left some time for us to ask questions, to have a discussion, because one of the things I know is that this idea of talking about Generation Z from a different perspective does prompt a lot of opinion. it does get people heated up, especially my generation of people. So are there any questions out there? Is there anything someone wants to raise, talk about, discuss?
Any questions, guys?
Don't be shy. It's now or never.
Awesome, guys. Just a quick reminder, I've posted the registration link in the chat box, as well as a feedback form. Guys, if you can spend an extra 2 or 3 minutes and just complete that for us, your feedback always very, very welcome and valuable. And Roger, thank you so much for the session this morning and for sharing with us. It was amazing. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
guys,
Thank
for
you,
joining.
guys. Thank you, folks, for the opportunity to share my ideas. Like I said, you know, I always talk about my teaching days. And when I go back to when I was teaching, I developed quite a passion every lesson. It became less about the content of the syllabus. So I was less concerned about my students knowing about the periodic table and a lot more passionate about ensuring that every time they walked out of my classroom, they thought differently about something. And that's really what I wanted to leave you with today in this session was when you walk away today, I want you to go out there and go, wow, I actually never thought about it from that point of view. And if that makes you behave a little differently, if that makes you lead a little more effectively, then my job is done. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and hold on to that power of perspective.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Enjoy the cold weather.
Thanks, Roger, very much.
Thank you. Thanks.